You think you can get away with this?
Let go! You're hurting me!
Not until you tell me!
His fingers were already around my throat before I could blink. Not grabbing, squeezing. Right there, in the middle of Gwanghwamun Mall, next to the pretzel stand. My 7-year-old daughter, Kala, was still chewing. She watched, with pretzel crumbs on her lip and confusion in her eyes, like her brain refused to process what her father was doing to her mother. People stopped walking. Nobody moved. A woman covered her mouth. A man took out his phone, not to call anyone, to record. And Vance? He smiled, because that's what he did when he had an audience. He performed. You think you can just take my daughter and disappear? His voice was calm. That was the terrifying part, not the screaming, the calm. I clawed at his wrists. My vision was going gray at the edges. Kala dropped her pretzel. She started crying, and still, nobody moved. Then the crowd shifted, not because of me, because of him. I didn't see him walk in. I felt the temperature change first, like the air got heavier, the noise got quieter. Vance felt it too. I know because his grip loosened just slightly and his eyes moved. There was a man standing 6 feet away, watching. No hurry, no panic. He was wearing a dark coat that probably cost more than my rent. His face was unreadable. His hands were at his sides, and slowly, deliberately, he reached down and began removing his rings, one by one, placing each one in his breast pocket like he was preparing for something he'd done before. Vance laughed. "Mind your business, man." The man didn't answer. He just looked at Vance the way you look at a problem you already know how to solve. 3 steps forward, 1 punch. That's it. Vance hit the floor like his legs forgot their job. The whole mall went silent. Not shocked silent, relieved silent. Like everyone had been holding their breath and finally exhaled. The man crouched down, looked Vance dead in the eye and said 5 words. "Don't make me come back." Then he stood up, straightened his coat, and looked at me. Not like a hero looks at someone he just saved, like a man who just noticed something that now belonged to his attention. If you've ever stood in a room full of people and felt completely alone, you already understand exactly how she feels. And if you want to know what happens to the man who finally did something, stay right here. Subscribe so the next story finds you before the next person it happens to doesn't have anyone. I should have said thank you. I should have grabbed Kala and left. Instead, I just stood there, heart slamming, throat burning, staring at a man whose name I didn't even know. He glanced at Kala, who had stopped crying and was staring at him with wide, serious eyes, and the corner of his mouth moved, almost a smile, almost. He turned to walk away. And that's when Kala, my 7-year-old daughter, who barely spoke to strangers, said, "Is he going to be our dad now?" I wanted the floor to eat me alive, but the man, he heard it. He stopped walking. He didn't turn around. He just paused. And somehow, that pause said everything. The police arrived before I found my voice. 4 officers. Vance was still on the floor, not unconscious, just choosing to stay down, which honestly felt like personal growth for him. They cuffed him. He looked at me the whole time they did it. Not angry, promising. That look that said, "This isn't over. This is just a pause." I'd seen that look for 6 years. I knew exactly what it meant. My throat still felt like it had his fingerprints burned into it. The officer asked me questions I could barely answer. My name, what happened, did I know the man who intervened? I said no. She wrote something down. Asked again, "Are you sure you don't know him?" Like she found that hard to believe. Like a man doesn't just punch your abusive ex-husband into the floor for no reason in the middle of the mall on a Tuesday. I said I was sure. She gave me a look that said, "Okay, but we both know that's weird," and moved on. Kala had found a bench and was sitting on it, swinging her legs, completely unbothered. 7 years old and already more composed than me. He was still there. I don't know why I expected him to leave. He was standing near the entrance, talking on a phone, one hand in his pocket. Calm, like he hadn't just rearranged someone's face 12 minutes ago. A mall security guard walked past him, saw his face, and crossed to the other side. Just like that, no hesitation. The security guard, a man with a badge and a radio, decided that was not his business today. That told me everything. I walked over anyway, because apparently my survival instincts were on lunch break. "Thank you," I said. He looked at me. Up close, he was younger than I expected. sharp jaw, tired eyes, the kind of tired that isn't about sleep. He said, "He'll post bail by morning. Not you're welcome, not no problem, just a fact, delivered like a warning." "How do you know that?" He put his phone away. "Because men like him always do." He looked at Kala, who was now openly staring at him from the bench with the focused intensity of a scientist studying a new species. He looked back at me. "You have a restraining order?" I blinked. "Yes. File a violation report tonight. Not tomorrow, tonight." He said it the way people say things when they already know what happens if you don't. Then he held out a card. Plain, black, just a name and a number. Cha Tae-jin. No title, no company, just a name. I looked up. "What do you do?" The corner of his mouth moved again, that almost smile. "I solve problems." He walked away. Kala appeared at my elbow, looked at the card, then looked at me with full seriousness and said, "Mommy, call him." I hate that my 7-year-old had better instincts than me. He was out by 6 a.m. I know because his mother called me at 6:04, not to check if I was okay, not to apologize, to tell me, and I need you to really hear this, that I had embarrassed the family, that I was dramatic, that Vance was a good man who just loved too hard. I held the phone away from my face and stared at it like it personally offended me. Loved too hard. The bruises on my throat were still visible in the mirror, but sure, too much love. Got it. I filed the restraining order violation report at 11 p.m. the night before, just like Tae-jin said. The officer at the desk typed slowly. So slowly, I aged visibly. He asked me twice if I was sure I wanted to file because, and I quote, "These domestic things have a way of sorting themselves out." I looked at him. He looked at me. I slid the photos of my throat across the desk. He stopped asking questions. But here's what nobody tells you about restraining order violations. Filing the report doesn't mean anything happens immediately. Vance knew that. He'd been through this system before. He knew exactly how many hours he had before any consequences caught up to him. My phone buzzed at 7 a.m. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Bail was denied. Tae-jin's voice. No greeting, just information, delivered like a news headline. I sat up straight. What? How? A pause. I made some calls. 3 words. I made some calls, like he'd ordered takeout. I didn't ask what kind of calls. Something in his tone said that was a door I didn't need to open yet. What I did ask was, "Why are you doing this?" The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was considered, like he was deciding how much truth to give me. "You filed the report," he said finally. "Courage deserves backup." It wasn't romantic, it wasn't smooth, it was just honest. And honestly, after 6 years of Vance, honest felt like oxygen. I took Kala to school at 8 a.m., normal routine. Cereal she didn't finish, backpack she overpacked, shoes on the wrong feet that I caught at the door. But at the school gate, I stopped. There was a man standing across the street, still watching. Not Vance, someone I'd never seen. Built like he professionally discouraged bad decisions. He caught me looking, gave a small nod, and turned away. My heart rate tripled. I called Tae-jin immediately. He picked up on the first ring. "That's Hyuk," he said before I could speak. "He's there for Kala." I exhaled so hard I nearly crumpled. "You posted someone at her school?" He said, "I posted 2. 2. He posted 2. I stood at that school gate for a full minute after Kala disappeared through the doors. Throat still sore, hands still shaky, but something had shifted overnight. Some baseline level of terror I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it had a weight. It was lighter, just slightly, and that scared me almost as much as Vance did, because hope, when you're not used to it, feels dangerously close to a trap. But then my phone buzzed again. A text from Tae-jin. "You haven't eaten. There's food at your door." I turned around. There was a bag on my porch, still warm. How long had he known where I lived? The food was still warm. Jjajangmyeon of all things. Black bean noodles in a sealed container with a pair of chopsticks and a napkin folded into a neat triangle. I stood on my porch holding it, still in yesterday's clothes, hair unbrushed, looking like a woman whose life had recently been reorganized without her permission, which, to be fair, was accurate. I didn't know whether to be grateful or terrified. I settled on both. I ate standing up at the kitchen counter because sitting down felt too calm for how my brain felt. Kala would have loved it. She always stole my noodles. My phone buzzed at noon. Not Tae-jin this time. Vance's cousin, Quincy, a man who had the unique skill of always appearing exactly when things were already bad to make them worse. The text was 4 words. He wants his daughter. I put the phone face down. It buzzed again. A photo this time. I flipped it over and my blood went cold. It was Calla, at school, in the yard, taken through the fence, today. Quincy had typed below it, he can get to her whenever he wants. Think about that. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the phone. It clattered on the counter and I just stood there, staring at the ceiling, breathing, trying not to fall apart in my own kitchen. I called Tajan. He picked up mid-first ring. I didn't say hello. I just said, they have a photo of Calla at school today. The silence on his end lasted exactly 2 seconds. Send it to me. I did. 15 seconds passed. Hyuk missed the angle. Won't happen again. His voice hadn't changed. Same temperature, same pace. Meanwhile, I was gripping the counter edge with both hands, trying to keep my knees from giving out. Tajan. Yes. They're threatening my daughter. Another pause. When he spoke again, something in his tone had shifted, barely, like a room where someone just turned the heat up 1 degree. I know, he said. It's already being handled. And before I could ask what handled meant, he hung up. 3 hours later, Quincy called me directly, crying, actually crying. He said he was sorry, that he'd made a mistake, that he wanted nothing to do with any of this anymore. He sounded like a man who had recently been shown something that permanently adjusted his priorities. I didn't ask what. I said okay, hung up, sat on the kitchen floor because the chair felt too far. I want you to understand something. In 6 years of this, not one person in Vance's circle had ever apologized to me. Not one. Whatever Tajan said to Quincy in 3 hours, it accomplished what 6 years of court dates and restraining orders couldn't. Calla came home at 3 p.m., dropped her backpack at the door, walked straight to me on the floor, and sat down next to me like it was completely normal to find your mother sitting on the kitchen tiles. She leaned her head on my shoulder. Mommy, the quiet man waved at me today. I looked at her. Which quiet man? She thought about it. Both of them. Both? Tajan hadn't posted 2 guards at her school. He'd posted 4. Tajan showed up at my door at 7 p.m. No call, no warning. Just a knock, 3 times evenly spaced like someone who'd never been in a hurry in their life. I opened the door still holding a dish towel, and he was standing there with 2 cups of coffee and an expression that said, "We need to talk," without his mouth moving at all. I let him in because at this point, the man had fed me, guarded my daughter, and psychologically dismantled Vance's entire support network in 72 hours. Turning him away felt both ungrateful and structurally unsound. He sat at my kitchen table, didn't touch the coffee immediately. His eyes moved around the room the way careful people's eyes do, not nosily, just registering. Then they stopped. On the windowsill, Calla had left her drawings there to dry, watercolors she'd done at school, still curling at the edges. 7 of them, all different. One was a woman and a small girl holding hands under a yellow sun, painted with the specific confidence of someone who hasn't yet learned to doubt themselves. Tajan looked at that one painting for so long that I stopped moving. His jaw tightened. Barely, but I caught it. "She painted that last week," I said quietly. He nodded once, slowly, still looking, and something about his face in that moment made me stop. There was a stillness in him that wasn't calm, it was weight, like a man holding something very heavy, very quietly, for a very long time. "You have a daughter," I said. It wasn't a question. He picked up the coffee. Had. 1 word, past tense. It landed in the room like something dropped from a height. He didn't volunteer more. I didn't push. But then, I don't know why I asked this. I said, "How old?" His eyes stayed on the painting. 7. The dish towel in my hands went still. 7. Calla's age. He said her name once, quietly. Nari, like it was something he didn't take out often. His wife's name was Heian. Car accident 3 years ago. Both of them. Gone. And here was this man, this terrifying, ring-removing, problem-solving man, sitting in my kitchen looking at a 7-year-old's watercolor painting like it was the most painful and most beautiful thing in the room, simultaneously. I felt something crack open in my chest that I wasn't prepared for. If you're still watching, good, because this is where everything changes. Here's what I want you to understand. I had spent 6 years with a man who made me feel like I was too much, too loud, too sensitive, too present. And in 5 days, Taejin had shown me more protection, more consistency, more quiet dignity than I'd seen in half a decade. But knowing about Nari shifted something. He wasn't protecting me because I was special. Kala reminded him of his daughter, and I didn't know how to feel about that. Grateful, sad, confused, all three in a soup on a Tuesday. The heart is not a simple instrument. Kala padded out in her socks, saw Taejin, and without a single word, climbed onto the chair beside him and pushed her drawing pad toward him with one finger. Draw something. She didn't ask, told. He looked at her for a long moment, and I saw it, the flicker of something raw that crossed his face before he controlled it. Then he picked up a crayon, orange because of course Kala only had the weird colors left, and he drew. Badly, it was clearly meant to be a cat, but it looked like an argument between two confused shapes. Kala studied it with the serious energy of an art critic. That's terrible. And Cha Tae-jin, feared, connected, untouchable Cha Tae-jin, laughed. A real one, short, surprised, like it had escaped before he could stop it. I had to look away, because a man who hasn't laughed in 3 years, laughing in your kitchen because your daughter roasted his drawing, that's not something you watch without consequences. Vance saw Taejin before I did. I know because his lawyer leaned over and whispered something, and Vance's entire body changed. Not dramatically, not like in movies where someone gasps and knocks over a water glass. Subtly. His shoulders dropped half an inch, his jaw unclenched. The color and his face went somewhere else. 6 years I spent being afraid of that man. 6 years of checking door locks twice, of flinching at footsteps, of reading his mood like weather before a storm. And he was sitting 20 feet away looking like he wanted to be anywhere else on earth. I won't lie to you, it felt incredible. Taejin was seated in the gallery, 3rd row, one leg crossed over the other, reading something on his phone like he'd come to watch a mildly interesting documentary. He hadn't told me he was coming. I turned around looking for Kala's school bag and just found him there. In a courtroom, in a charcoal suit that cost more than my legal fees. My lawyer, a tired woman named Adeze who'd seen everything, glanced at him, then at me, raised one eyebrow exactly 2 millimeters, and wrote something in her notepad. I decided not to explain, partly because I didn't have time, mostly because I didn't fully understand it myself. The judge reviewed the restraining order violation. Vance's lawyer argued it was a misunderstanding, a coincidence that his client had ended up at the same mall. Right, coincidence, with his hands around my throat. The judge looked at the medical photographs. Then she looked at Vance. Then she set bails so high that the entire defense table shifted in their seats. Vance turned and looked at me with that familiar promise in his eyes, but this time something interrupted it. His gaze snagged on Taejin, and Taejin, without looking up from his phone, turned one page. That was it. That was all he did. Vance looked away first. He looked away first. I had waited 6 years for someone to make that man look away first. Outside the courtroom, Vance's mother found me in the hallway, same woman who'd called me dramatic with bruises on my throat. She looked at Taejin standing beside me, and her whole speech evaporated. Whatever she'd prepared, gone. She opened her mouth once, closed it, and walked in the other direction at a tactic that was technically not running. Adeze watched her leave, then looked at Taejin, then looked at me. "Keep him," she said flatly, and walked off to find coffee. My lawyer giving me relationship advice in a courthouse hallway? This is my life now. Taejin said nothing until we reached the car park, then sentencing is in 3 weeks. I stopped walking. How do you know that? The date wasn't announced yet. He opened the passenger door, waited. Taejin. Get in, Zola. Kala's waiting. He said her name like he'd been saying it for years. Easy, natural, like she was already part of a sentence he'd memorized. I got in. I didn't push. But I want you to think about something. Who exactly had this man been talking to? Because courthouse sentencing dates don't leak to civilians. They don't. So what was Cha Tae-jin really? Stay with me. 6 years she waited for that moment. 6 years. And it took one man in a courtroom to make it happen. If this story is doing something to your chest right now, that's exactly why you should subscribe. Because every week we find the people who refused to stay down. You deserve to hear every single one. He told me in a parking garage, which, looking back, is exactly the kind of place you tell someone something that reorganizes their entire understanding of the last 2 weeks. No windows, concrete walls, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the smell of engine oil and the sound of my own breathing getting louder. He didn't dress it up, didn't ease into it. He just turned to face me, hands in his pockets, and said, "I run an organization. It operates outside legal structures. I have relationships with people inside the justice system. That's how I knew the sentencing date." Silence. I counted 3 cars in my eye line. A blue sedan, a delivery van, a black SUV with tinted windows that had been parked outside my building twice this week. I pointed at it. "Is that yours?" He didn't even look. Yes. Let me tell you what happens to your brain when you find out the man protecting you and your daughter is by any reasonable definition a crime boss. It doesn't go blank, it goes very, very loud. Every scene replays at double speed. The ring removal, the bail denial, Quincy crying on the phone, the courthouse sentencing date, the 4 guards at a primary school. I'd been walking around for 2 weeks thinking I'd been rescued by a very competent, very well-connected businessman. I had not. I had been rescued by a man whose business was the kind you don't put on LinkedIn. And somehow, Kala was safer because of it. I didn't know what to do with that. "Say something," he said. I laughed, not because anything was funny, because it was either that or cry, and I was tired of crying. "You punched my ex-husband in a mall because he had his hands around your throat in front of your child." His voice didn't shift. No defensiveness, no performance, just a fact laid flat on the table. I would have done it regardless of who I am. I looked at him for a long time. "Does what you do, does it put Kala in danger?" He held eye contact. "No. My world and your life will never touch. That's a line I don't cross." And here's the thing that broke me a little. I believed him. Not because I was naive, because I'd watched this man operate for 2 weeks, and his word had been the only thing in my life that had held exactly as promised, every single time. Here's the plot twist nobody saw coming, and I mean nobody. Tae-jin hadn't been in that mall by accident. He'd been there because 3 days before the incident, an anonymous tip had been filed with his organization. Someone had warned them that Vance was planning to snatch Kala during a custody handover. Someone close to Vance had tipped them off. I stared at him. Who filed the tip? Tae-jin's expression shifted. Something careful moved behind his eyes. Someone who loves Kala and couldn't go to the police. One person fit that description. One person who knew Vance's plans, had no faith in the legal system, but apparently had faith in something else. Kala's grandmother, Vance's own mother. The woman who'd called me dramatic with bruises on my throat had 3 days earlier sent a distress signal to a Korean crime organization to protect her granddaughter. The world is not simple. People are not simple. And I was standing in a parking garage learning both lessons at once. Tae-jin gave me time, a full week. No calls unless I initiated, no food appearing mysteriously on porches, just distance offered cleanly, like a man who understood the difference between giving someone space and abandoning them. On day 6, Kala asked me why the quiet men outside still looked the same, but the nice one hadn't visited. I told him he was busy. She thought about it. "Tell him we still have orange crayons." I picked up my phone, typed exactly that. His reply came in 40 seconds. "I'll be there at 7. I'll bring better crayons." And just like that, the distance collapsed. Not because of me, because of a 7-year-old's crayon diplomacy. You cannot script this kind of thing. You really cannot. Vance got 4 years. I know because I was sitting in the 3rd row when the judge said it, and the sound went hollow in my ears, the way it does when your brain needs a second to catch up to reality. 4 years. Not a fine, not probation, not another piece of paper that meant nothing. 4 years. His lawyer was already talking about appeals before the gavel came down. Vance didn't look at the judge. He looked at me. And for the first time in 6 years, that look didn't land. It just passed through me like light through glass. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I held it until he was the one who broke. Again. Tae-jin was in the gallery again. Same row, different suit, navy this time, which Kala had specifically approved when I described it to her that morning over cereal. Don't ask me when my daughter started having opinions about this man's wardrobe. I don't have answers. What I can tell you is that when the verdict came down, I turned to find him and he was already looking at me. Not with celebration, not with "I told you so," just steady. Like a wall that had decided to stay exactly where it was no matter what weather came through. Ada, my lawyer, leaned over and whispered, 4 years with his priors means he serves at least 3. Then she looked at Tae-jin, then back at me. I don't know what you did, she said, but the DA's office was thorough this time. She said thorough the way people say it when they mean something else entirely. Outside, the air smelled like rain that hadn't decided to fall yet, that specific pressure in the sky that feels like a held breath. I stood on the courthouse steps and I cried. Not sad crying, not relief crying, the kind of crying that happens when your body finally believes something your brain has been too scared to accept. It was over. Not fixed, nothing about the last 6 years was fixed, but the immediate danger, the daily wait, the checking of locks and reading of moods, that chapter was closing. Tae-jin stood beside me, didn't touch me, didn't speak, just present, solid, smelling faintly of cedar wood and coffee. Sometimes the most powerful thing another person can do is simply refuse to leave. He understood that. Then his phone rang. He glanced at it. Something crossed his face. Fast, controlled, but I caught it. I have to take this. He stepped away, spoke in Korean low and quick. When he came back, his expression had reset, but his eyes hadn't. What's wrong? He looked at me for a moment like he was calculating something. One of Vance's associates, not Quincy, filed a complaint with a federal contact. They're looking into how the bail was denied. My stomach dropped. Meaning they're looking into you. He tilted his head. Technically, yes. But also, he pulled out his phone and showed me a document, a legal filing. His organization, apparently, had a legitimate corporate structure that would take federal investigators approximately 18 months to untangle. He'd prepared for this. He had already prepared for this before it happened. I looked at him standing there on courthouse steps, rain finally starting to fall in thin, cold needles, completely unrattled by the news that federal eyes might be turning his direction. You already knew this was a possible outcome, I said. Not a question. Yes. And you did it anyway. He looked at me with those tired, certain eyes. You needed it done. 4 words. Simple. No performance, no dramatics, just a man who had looked at the cost, decided it was worth it, and paid it without telling me. I want you to sit with that for a second, because if you've never had someone absorb consequences on your behalf quietly without asking for credit, you don't know what that does to a person. Subscribe, because what he does next is the moment this entire story has been building toward. He blindfolded me. And before you say anything, I know how that sounds, but it was Kala who tied it with her school hair ribbon, giggling the entire time like she was in on the world's best secret, which it turned out she was. Tae-jin had called her first, not me, her. He'd asked my 7-year-old daughter for permission before he planned any of this. I found that out later and I had to sit down, just sit completely down. Because Vance had been her father for 7 years and never once asked what she needed. This man had known her for 3 weeks and asked her permission before doing something for her mother. The contrast doesn't need commentary, it just needs a moment of silence. The elevator opened and the air changed. Cool, wide, the smell of Seoul at night, fried street food from somewhere below, faint jasmine, the particular metallic clarity that high buildings have when the city is humming underneath you. He took the blindfold off. The entire rooftop of his building had been cleared and set with 1 table, 2 chairs, warm lighting strung in clean lines overhead, and the skyline of the city spread out in every direction like it had dressed up for the occasion. I laughed. I couldn't help it. "This is excessive," I said. He pulled out my chair. "You deserve excessive." He said it so plainly, not smooth, not rehearsed, like it was just a fact he'd calculated and was reporting accurately. I sat down before my legs made the decision for me. We ate. Real food, galbi, soft tofu stew, japchae that tasted like someone's grandmother made it, which, knowing Tae-jin's reach, was entirely possible. We talked, not about Vance, not about federal investigations or security details or court dates. He asked about my degree, the interior design program I deferred 3 years ago when things got bad. I told him I'd missed the enrollment window again this year. He nodded slowly, the way he nodded when he was filing something away rather than just listening. I didn't notice it then. I should have. Then he asked about Kala's school, whether she was happy there, whether the area felt safe, whether I'd ever considered the Mapo district. 3 specific questions. Too specific. I looked at him. Why Mapo district? He picked up his glass. No reason. There is never no reason with this man. There is never no reason. After dinner, he walked me to the edge of the rooftop, the city below us glittering like someone had dropped a jar of light. He stood beside me and was quiet for a long time. Then, "I want to show you something tomorrow, you and Kala." I turned to look at him. His face in the city light was open in a way I hadn't seen before. The weight's still there. It would probably always be there, but something else beside it now. Something careful and new. "What is it?" He looked at the skyline. "A house in Mapo district. 3 bedrooms. 1 has been painted yellow." My throat closed, just like that, shut completely, because yellow was Kala's favorite color, and I had never, not once, told him that. "How did you know yellow?" He looked at me. "She told me, the night she made me draw the terrible cat." Of course she did. I didn't cry on the rooftop. I saved it for the elevator, which was honestly better because at least the doors closed. Tae-jin stood beside me, looked straight ahead at the elevator doors, and without turning said, "The acceptance letter for the design program is on the kitchen counter of the house. I deferred your enrollment. It's paid. Fully." The elevator hummed. My reflection in the metal doors looked like a woman being handed something she stopped believing she deserved. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, took a breath. "Tae-jin, why?" He was quiet for 3 full floors. Then, still looking forward, because Haein wanted to study architecture. She never got to. The doors opened. Neither of us moved. "I can't be her," I whispered. "I know," he said. "I'm not asking you to be her. I'm asking you to not waste yours the way I couldn't save hers." I stepped out of that elevator a completely different person than the one who stepped in. Some words don't just land, they restructure you. Kala walked into that house like she already owned it. No hesitation, no shyness. She dropped her backpack at the front door, same way she dropped it at home, like bags were someone else's problem, and just walked through every room with her hands clasped behind her back, nodding slowly, a 7-year-old conducting a property inspection. Tae-jin followed 2 steps behind her, hands in his pockets, expression completely serious, like her approval was the only metric that mattered, because for him, it was. I stood in the doorway of that townhouse in Mapo district and watched a crime boss get evaluated by a 1st grader, and I thought, this is the most insane and most perfect thing I have ever witnessed. Then Kala opened the yellow room. She stood in the doorway and went completely still. Pale yellow walls, a small white desk by the window, shelves already stocked with the exact book she liked. I don't know how he knew. I've stopped asking how he knows things. A single drawing pinned above the bed, framed. I stepped closer. It was her drawing, the one she'd pushed across the table at my kitchen that first night, the one with the big heads and crayon sunshine. He'd kept it, framed it, and hung it in a room he'd designed around a child he'd known for 3 weeks. Kala turned around. Her eyes were wet, and this girl never cried. She walked straight to Tae-jin and hugged him around the middle without a word. He froze for exactly 1 second. Then his arms came down around her, and his face, this man's face, this carefully controlled, unreadable face, completely came apart. Just for a moment. Just enough. I had to look at the ceiling. I am not made of stone, but I was trying to be. 3 months later, here's what the epilogue looks like. And I'm giving it to you straight because you stayed this whole time and you deserve the full picture. I started the design program. First week nearly broke me. In the best way, the way growth does. Adeyaze called to say the federal inquiry into bail proceedings had been quietly closed. She didn't say why. I didn't ask. Vance's mother started therapy. She called me once on a Sunday and just said, "I'm sorry I didn't protect you." 7 words, 6 years overdue. I accepted them anyway. Not for her, for me. Because carrying that weight any longer would have been the real injustice. Tae-jin and I, we're not a fairy tale. I want to be clear about that, because you deserve honesty more than you deserve a neat bow. We're two people with damage that doesn't disappear because someone shows up with the right timing. We argue. He's too controlled sometimes and I'm too reactive sometimes, and Kala referees both of us with a 7-year-old's complete lack of diplomacy. But here's what we are. Consistent. He shows up every time. Not with grand gestures, though the rooftop dinner lives rent-free in my memory forever, but in the small, daily, unglamorous ways that actually build a life. That's rarer than power, rarer than money, rarer than anything. Last Tuesday, he came over after Kala's school play. She was a tree. She was magnificent. And while she was asleep, he sat across from me at the kitchen table and slid something small across the wood. A ring. Not a diamond, a thin band with a single word engraved inside in Korean. I looked up. What does it say? He was watching me the way he'd watched Kala's drawings that very first night, like something that carried weight he hadn't expected. Namnunda, he said quietly. It remains. Not forever, not always, just it remains. I put it on. It fit perfectly. Of course it did, because Cha Tae-jin, in every single thing he does, had already accounted for the details. The man came into my life through a pretzel stand and a stranger's bruised throat, and he stayed like he'd been there all along. Some people walk into your story, and some people were written into it before you even knew the story had started. He was the second kind, and me? I was finally ready to stop surviving and start living. Don't forget to subscribe, because the next story, it starts the same way this one did. Quiet, ordinary, then everything changes. Some people will watch this and say it's too good to be true, but you watched every chapter. You know exactly how much it costs both of them to get here. If this story reminded you that survival isn't the finish line, that you're allowed to want more than just safety, then subscribe, because the next person's story starts exactly where yours might be right now, and they need to know it doesn't end there.